officially being recorded now.
Okay.
Everyone is aware of that.
Is Tim on?
Tim is on, right there on camera.
Basically, this is a viewers meeting. It is for the purpose of an LID. The city's been petitioned, and the city also in its own initiative has asked for the viewers meeting. All three viewers have been supplied with copies of what was in the council packet, which was the RCA and the plat and the map and list of owners, city managers for 1 through 6 outlined there, and then a copy of the estimated cost in total for the different projects. And basically, Joe and I have been working on this for a while, and there's a couple things that have arisen in the discussions, whether we're going to do just a water district LID, or whether it's going to include streets, curbs, gutters, drains, all of that with it. There's different numbers, of course, with each, but the primary emphasis that got this going was basically the water problem down there. There may be some wells that have different things in them that people don't really want, or basically some of them just go dry in the summertime. They got to haul in water and stuff like that. And so with that, then was the discussions revolved around, well, if you're going to do that, then how about including the streets, curbs, sides, gutters, and drains at the same time, and get it all get an improvement down there. So anyway, that's what's before you. The purpose of the meeting here is, it says, upon the city, thereupon, I'm reading from the ordinance, the city council shall forthwith appoint by resolution, which we did, 3 freeholders, and each of you told me that you are inside the city limits of Sweet Home, and are qualified electors, which you also have told me that you are, viewers who shall investigate the plat, and that was in your, that's in your documents here today, but it's also in the packet that you got, and report, which basically includes the maps and the things that I just went over, the maps and the cost estimate, and the 1 through 6 for the outline, and the plat itself was in there. And so showing the boundaries basically of the proposed LID, whether it be water or water and street. And Joe can go in more into that and tell you what that's all about. And shall make recommendations, that's with an S on it, if you got more than one, to the council with regard to the project, together with a just estimated assessment of the benefits of the property, to the property that they determine to be specifically benefited by the project. The city recorder shall act as clerk for the viewers. So that's where we are right now. If you've read the RCA and the other documents, basically from here, you go into, we have notification to the owners. We have notification to the public through the paper. And with that, then the council themselves will have a hearing on this. They'll take into consideration the viewers report, which we shall write up, and you can check on Thursday at 10. That's what the second meeting, anyway, in our ideas of things, how it will go for you to approve what we've done. And if there's any little changes, we can get those done, but we have to get them in by our timeline is by Friday to the city manager's office, and then also in the paper to meet the next New Era paper for the next Wednesday. The following Wednesday, you have to get it in by Friday. So that's our outline, and that's what we're thinking of hopefully to do. The first thing, and I won't go into some other things that I have here that you might want to deal with or not, just let council deal with them. But the first thing and the most important thing we get here today is we listen to Joe explain what the boundaries are to the proposed LIDs, what they include, and then what basically the big document that you don't have that you're here for is a breakdown of on each property, and probably one step back from that, since that will be just done by numbers, depending on what methodology do you guys recommend for the split of the cost, because that's what an LID is basically it's a mechanism to come before council. If council by their own motion, and this is by their own motion, plus it's by, we've got at this time, a petition of more than a majority of the owners coming before council, and then them deciding to do the LID based on a methodology that you may recommend, or the staff may recommend, or they may come up with themselves. But you're here to decide what you think after listening to Joe explain your different options on methodology and what you've got before you, what you think is the most just and fair for the situation. And he may even be able to give you a little history on different what other folks have done. It's my understanding the last one we did was in 1995, and a couple of them have tried to go since then, but have not gone through. In reading the history, at least in the ordinance, the interest rate because we're going to have to go out and get a loan through a bond probably to finance all of this, and then there's going to be a repayment back. The interest, they sort of made the interest on the bond match up with what the interest they were charging the people. But we can get into those issues later if you want to deal with those issues. If you don't and think, well, those are council issues, then we'll just say those are council issues and you deal with them. But the one you do need to deal with, to circle back around, is the methodology that you think is best, and then look at the figures that Joe comes up with for how much that's going to cost everybody. So I'll turn it over to Joe.
Hello. I might as well start off with the one that drove this whole thing, which is the water system. So on one of the maps that you should have has a purple outline with blue lines in the streets indicating water lines. It's the title block is called the Boundary Map of Water Line and Service Improvements. And this network down here, well, I should say that from 18th Avenue and Vine, it loops around through Tamarack Street. Anything north along 18th Avenue is a dead-end cul-de-sac. And we have 58 properties there, served with a variety of line size. Eventually, it will not be a cul-de-sac. It will actually be a through water line, because normally you don't want to build a water line of this size. That's a dead-end system. But in the meantime, what had been used for the previous LIDs was a combination of the linear front footage of each property and a square foot of that same property to a certain maximum depth. Those two values added together, divided for an average, and that number is the one that goes into the chart that gets assessed per linear foot, per square foot costs. Those are averaged so that there's one single cost per property. What that does is try to massage the numbers to adjust them so that If you have a little tiny property, yes, you would only pay a little tiny amount. If you have a big one, you would spend a large amount. And so what this does, it moderates the costs and spreads it out over those 58 properties. It cuts the curve or the peak for the high properties, raises the low properties. In the past, we, the city, have used 150 feet as a maximum depth. That's flexible. It can be anything. Could be 10, could be 200. But we've used 150 in the last 3 LIDs, I believe, and I'm not sure before that. Records are sparse. And I would caveat that too, that 150 feet is quite a bit, but it worked out okay on the last one, which was 28th Avenue. The average depth of these properties here is 86 feet. So you're substantially over the average by that, but you're covering the vast majority of lots. So the cost could be assessed to the properties just strictly by the linear front footage, or it could be with this modified process of averaging it out. The shorter that depth is, the lesser cost for the larger properties, and the higher cost for smaller properties, because the total dollars have to be allocated across the project. And as you manipulate the number, the accessible depth, it trickles through an effect for the others, small or medium or large. This project would be providing, I believe it's 40, I'll look here, but it provides, I believe, 46 or 47 immediate services to properties. There's a few that do not have a development on it. That's going to change eventually and it'll all be full. But there's 58 individual properties that would have a service line to each property. The line sizes are 6 and 8 inch, well, 6 and 4, which is pretty much our minimum line size. The one exception to that is the 12-inch line that's on 18th Avenue and on Willow Street, because that 12-inch line is part of a transmission main proposed to parallel Main Street and run across the northern part of the city. It will eventually tie into 47th Avenue with other developments in the future. But every segment has to have its piece of the process. And basically, there's an assessment methodology. There's other things to consider too about, well, not so much with water. I'll take that back. The water is pretty straightforward. The trench work for the patch of the water lines is pretty straightforward. The costs have been allocated out, and I've contacted contractors and online to have approximately the appropriate cost. You always want to be a little over rather than under. And so I think it's a very reasonable cost. It's still a high average to that community down there. I should say over there, don't mean down there. And it would be, it might be a little difficult for some of the people, but that's part of this whole process, is how do we deal with the financing element. The lines, well, actually, there's going to be about 6 fire hydrants. There's a couple thousand feet of water lines. It's pretty straightforward as it goes. There are, like I say, the choices the committee would need to make for assessment, that type of thing. Things get a little more complicated looking at a street development in that area, but the water line is pretty reasonable and would eventually be able to connect to more. Typically, cities will cover the oversize, quote unquote, as it is, for development of water lines above the neighborhood standard. For example, all things being equal, this water line on 18th and Willow would be an 8-inch water line, but we want it to be a 12 for other city reasons. That needs to be taken into consideration, and how we want to deal with that. If the whole neighborhood should pay for that, or is that a coverage that the city is willing or able to do? But in a nutshell, that's a long-winded nutshell. My apologies for that. Is the extent of this, of the water LID for these people. I would say, though, there are two, almost three properties that are very large that would pay a pretty high cost for their single service, but percentage-wise, but that's the proportion that it would work out. All things are flexible, as I understand it, from these local improvement districts. It's a matter of deciding how to make the criteria and the parameters. They are.
What about the bringing in the next map, the Willow Street neighborhood LID boundary map for street and sidewalk improvements? What does that?
That one gets a little more complicated. It's basically the same neighborhood to bring in good pavement, sidewalk, pedestrian ways, and basically a drainage system that the neighborhood does not have right now. On the boundary map of streets, the blue line in that same neighborhood is the primary area. However, it left to itself, it would not connect to the existing sidewalks and corners at 18th and Tamarack, which wouldn't make much sense. You'd end up going 250 feet north of Tamarack or more before you hit this other developed neighborhood. And so the street LID would be a little bit different, at the pleasure of the committee, of course. That on one side of the street, where the majority of people live, would have an improvement of a sidewalk to be able to connect into the linkage and the existing network that we have. And there's a number of decisions I had written up in the center to Robert, kind of a list of only about 8 items that need some consideration in this area. One of which is, do we want to add that connectivity between what's existing and proposed in the same area of the water district? Is it acceptable to do a one-side system to provide access for just those people on, which is the east side of 18th Avenue? Because there's only a few, basically 4 homes on the west side of 18th Avenue. The large property at the end of the street at Yucca has, I believe, that was 600 linear feet of frontage, and they have 1 house on it, which would be very expensive. And so how do we mitigate that? Do we want them left out of a street improvement district, just because they're across the street and they're the only house there for 700 feet of frontage? Or would we have some proportionate share of the total, even though they don't have a sidewalk on their side of the street? Because it'll be a pretty expensive portion to build. The same applies with the other streets. Some are two-sided sidewalks. A few of them are single-sided. And it doesn't seem like it would be a big thing, but if you assess one side of the street that gets a sidewalk and the other side of the street that can use that same sidewalk, but they don't have to pay anything for it, good for them, right? So that's a consideration. And it also goes to how you assessed corner properties. Corner properties that are involved within the district, if you go by the linear frontage and average square footage, you also have an overlap of that process because it's a corner. So while our ordinance does not take into account details like corner properties, much less a corner property that is part of the LID and also not part of it, for example, Vine or Tamarack Street, that needs a guidance on how to assess those. Do you just do it by the long side and cover everything and the cost is spread proportionally through the whole neighborhood? Do you divide it off at a 45-degree angle? On the street and sidewalk improvement map, you'll notice that at Tamarack and 18th, those properties have been chamfered off at a 45-degree angle. And the other option is at Vine Street, where one side is ignored totally, but they get the benefit of having a sidewalk segment. Or like the other side of Vine Street, the entire property is assessed. And even this street improvement project does not encompass the rest of the streets in the neighborhood. Nothing on Vine, nothing on Ulix, nothing on Tamarack. However, that was a consideration early on, but it's not part of this. Basically, this is the water district, and it's also the sidewalk district with the extension to the corner at 18th to tie into existing networks. And that's a consideration to, take into account as well. So in a close nutshell, I can answer any detail or other questions you might have. That's primarily my concerns of how do we assess these costs to the people who some may be affected or benefited and some may not. And yet they're 30 or 40 feet away from said benefit. I had emailed out to Robert and Blair and Ray a list of things that I had thought of that need to be considered. And I didn't have all of your emails, so I didn't. I can give you this. It's actual paper instead of an electronic version, but will that do? And if you have access to the Teams software for meeting and coordination, this is copied into a project file there. I can send you the links and that kind of stuff. But basically I might as well I'll just give you the short one word per group here. It has to do with the maximum depth of the properties, which both streets and water lines would be an issue. Um, the frontage distance on large properties, the city water line cost on 18th and Willow. One is the payback lien allocated time frame. Brandon had suggested 30 years with bonds, general obligation bonds, I guess. Should there be a consideration of the system development charges, current or proposed new, because it is an existing neighborhood, but they're also getting a development that puts a extra cost onto our infrastructure load, particularly water, of course. Let's see. And when should that system development charge, if applied, take effect? Should there be a consideration of seniors, low income, people who otherwise normally would have some consideration for the cost of a project like this? I believe that was done with the 28th Avenue LID about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And whether that should be a percentage or a fixed dollar amount, per household or per property.
Just for that point.
Yeah.
In the ordinance itself, it has the parameters.
Yeah. Okay.
For that.
Okay, good. I
Further
forgot
on
that.
in the ordinance.
Good. Let's see. I mentioned how to assess corner properties, and then the consideration of sidewalks in the sense for the pedestrian and standard urban environment that one would normally have in the city, which is drainage systems, sidewalks, pedestrians, that type of thing, and how to assess them if it's directly benefiting it or across the street. And okay, that takes care of my list. I had another one about whether we should have LIDs. Well, how we assessed LIDs on existing neighborhoods with new developments of just like street paving, for example. Street paving is one thing. That's a maintenance issue. If we do a full urban development with curbs and drainage and sidewalks and street paving, that's different, and that's what we're here about to consider. But anyway, that's it this time.
Okay, the things that I see from this is that, to get it back to Joe's brought up some questions, and he'll get you that information and get me a copy too. That I get back to Joe with is, for this committee, the central issue is we've had these other issues brought up by Joe and I, but get back to the idea of, I guess, first would be what do you want, just the water? Do you want the water and streets? Or do you want us to give them both of them, and it will go up there and we can say, this is your first pick, this is your second pick, or whatever, however we do. And then what methodology do you want to use? And then anything that on that methodology, like I guess the corner lots or whatever, you probably have to answer some of those questions. The questions about the SDCs and the what the city's going to do and how much the financing is well, you can certainly make recommendations, and that's why we brought them up, and we'll discuss them if you want. But it's secondary to what we're here for. Those are council decisions, and they'll be council decisions whether you make recommendations or not. But the point of it is you can certainly have your recommendations if you want to, and we'll discuss them if you want. But the main one and the first one is from the ordinance, how big area do you want? Do you want this area? And then what do you want to do in it? And then how are we going to adjust the monies. So I guess with Joe and I talking, now we'll go back to the committee and see if you've got, what questions you've got and what you're thinking. Dave, first?
I have some thoughts and some questions and maybe even some ideas.
Okay.
First, just a little bit of background. I grew up, my high school years, I lived down there. My folks owned property in that area until I think probably 2017 when it was sold out. So I know the area well. I know the need for water and I know what happens with the wells. My dad's well serviced two other households as well as their own when they were living there and doing that. The roads, I hadn't been down there in about 3 or 4 years since my mom had passed away and the property was gone. But I went down last week and it hasn't changed. The roads are still passable, but if you're in a hurry, you're going to bottom out some vehicles and it would be a real improvement. But there's some things that bother me. I guess the first one is that the initial request for the LID was for water, which is their main concern. And then the street and everything came in, not as an afterthought, but as a way for all those improvements to be made.
Just so you'll, in this particular case, as you well know, is looking at who owns what. Just at least at this juncture, the main property owner down there was looking for streets also. Streets was in agreement, at least in verbal.
Well, this is another one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that we want to be, or council wants to be very careful. If you go forward with an LID, according to our ordinance, you can have a majority, a simple majority, get things put in motion. But if you have a remonstrance against it, it takes 2/3 to kill it.
Right.
And we have one property owner that has enough property to make that 2/3 a moot point.
Correct.
There's 22 properties owned by one individual or the investment company. So you have to be, as a council, be very careful that you're sure that you want to know what to do before you initiate it, because you're going to have all of the other people caught up in the slipstream. I did just, as probably everybody else has, just a roughing of the numbers, taking simply the properties, not taking into account square footage or frontage or whatever, just the dividing the properties into the cost. And the water only numbers come up to just over 14,000 in assessments per property. If you do the full gamut with streets, curbs, gutters, everything, that number goes to 39,000 per property. On Willow Street alone, there's probably a half dozen properties that right now will not come close to that in value. That's a lot of money to be putting on those people. And unless the city wants to get into the position of having a bunch of property to reclaim, some of them will just not pay, period. Some of them will make an effort and may not be able to. I think the fairest method on assessments is the combination of front footage and square footage. that council has used in the past. Because then the bigger properties with a small frontage end up paying more what would be right. So that would be my recommendation there. If we go with just the water, I think that should be mandatory hookup when it's all said and done. I don't want somebody saying, well, my well's good enough, I don't want to hook up.
Well, on
Good.
that one, that's up to everybody. But just so you keep it separated, if we do an LID, whether they hook up or not, they owe the money. That's what an LID is.
I
So
know.
they don't have to hook up for us to get our money.
But you won't have the monthly rate.
Yeah.
You won't have them hooked up to the water.
Yeah. But to get the money back for the LID.
Exactly.
Right,
Well,
okay,
yeah, I know.
okay.
I
Gotcha,
understand that.
gotcha.
I don't think systems development charges should be an issue. I don't think that should be a charge in this. That's for a new development. This is an existing neighborhood, an existing area in town. I guess if I had to put some preferences, my number one choice would be water, first and foremost, because it's very necessary. My second would be water and some type of road improvement simply for service vehicles, if nothing else. You know, if an ambulance or a police car needs to get down there, the way the roads are now, it's going to take them at least twice as long to get there without some type of improvement. And my third and last choice would be the whole gamut. Because I frankly don't think that a lot of those people, number one, they want the water, but they can't afford to do anything. While that might not be a reason to stop an LID, I think it's something that should be considered. It's needed. I cannot argue that. But when you have one person in effect that can control the thing after it once is set in motion, you have to be very careful before you get into it. Just my thoughts.
That was the way it was on the 28th Avenue LID. On 28th Avenue.
Yeah.
That there was one property owner on the west side of 28th Avenue who had enough land to initiate it and enough land to mitigate the 2/3 denial and to prevent that part from happening. And so that went through the system, seemed to work out pretty good for them, but it was undeveloped grassland at the time.
Mm-hmm. You know, I cannot say that it's not necessary, because it is necessary. I know what has went on in the past with water under what they have available now. All of them that want to keep their wells should be able to, because we have a system to where the backflow things can be put in line to where they could use that for irrigating, but it wouldn't interfere with the city water systems. And they would always have a minimum rate by just using city water for household use. But, when I look at that $39,000 charge against some of the properties.
Was that about what yours was, Joe? Because you were using the methodology, is that about right?
Yes, it dropped it into the 37,000.
Yeah.
Whole thing.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, if you use a square foot system, it would drop that down.
But that's,
And that's the average.
Yeah.
There's more and there's less.
Yeah,
And there's also, by the time you spread that out over a 30-year payments, 12 months a year, you're looking at least around $200 a month. Oh,
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. But yes, it would equal out over that 30-year period to about $200 a month. Subject to the citizen involved paying 100% of all available costs.
I don't know that as a committee member, I would want to get involved into what part the council might think that the city could, there are some things that they could say that we have some funds available to where we can help $1,000 per property or something like that. But we can't eat half the costs. That can't be done. That wouldn't be fair to the city now, as well as not being fair to all of the other people within the city that have already borne these costs. There's a reason for things to be set up the way they are, to where when you get the benefit of it, you have to pay for that benefit. But we also have to be careful and make sure that we're just not creating a situation that is going to have the city or somebody end up with properties after it's all said and done, because there will be some that simply will not pay. What do you think, Charlene?
Well, being very familiar with that area, and we drove down by that the other day just to familiarize myself like you to make sure, to see how much it's changed, which it hasn't. My concern about when you're talking about doing street improvements, sidewalks, that kind of thing, I know having to drive down through doing code enforcement in the past, doing things like that, down on 19th Avenue, 20th Avenue in that area, those streets are so narrow. And we're looking at tiny lots. They're not very big lots. I don't know that you can do full street improvements. If you did that, you're going to take half of those lots that are already so tiny, and that's not up to me. It's just an observation, having been down there a lot. I agree with Dave on the choices, the way that I would think to do it. The water's desperately needed, I think. It would be wonderful if you could do some street improvement without the full improvements. I don't know how you do that. That's not my job. I wasn't trained for that. You know that. There's so many pros and cons on it. Certainly as a committee member, I don't think it's my job or my expertise to make the decision about how it's paid for and how you do that. I think it's definitely needed, the water. If someone came along and gave us a whole ton of money someday, we could do the whole thing, but I'd love to see some improvements in that area just for the quality of life for people down there. And we keep saying down there, wherever it is. I don't think I can make any more, a better statement than what Dave did. Made good points. But that was just kind of my thinking, is that just knowing the conditions the streets are, how narrow they are, how small the lots are, I'm glad it's not my job. So, I don't know. What about you, Tim?
Well, I have to agree with both the input of Charlene and Dave. But the water, I think, is imperative, finding a way to get that done. And I would agree with just doing it by the lineal foot. Those that have more frontage pay more. And those lots down there are much smaller than I remember them being. But question to Joe, what are the right-of-ways down there in width on Yucca and Willow?
Thank you. The right of way on 18th Avenue is a 50-footer, and on Willow, but 19th and Yucca is a 40-foot right of way width, and that is barely our smallest size street. We can get pavement and 2 sidewalks on there, but 20th Avenue is a 50-foot right of way through the trees, but Yucca is a fairly small street, and certainly 19th and that unnamed 19th loop to the west side of the dead end portion. That's even smaller. I believe that was a 20-foot. It's similar to an alley, basically.
Loop it.
Yes. But it's a 40-foot wide street. If the streets were improved to at least the paving width of what's called the county standard, that's basically roadside drainage of whatever matter, and just asphalt in the middle, 22 to 24 feet wide. Not exactly what you would find in a city. If you want a lot of that, you're either in a private development or you're outside the city in the county. But it could fit. But yes, it is tight.
So if we allowed parking on both sides of the street, you'll be weaving yourself up and down the street to get around parked cars.
Affirmative. Yeah, pretty much like like First Avenue, they're barely above
Yes.
the availability of a 40-foot wide right-of-way. I think they're like 42 or something along those lines.
Well, 27th Avenue, how wide is that?
Oh, yeah. 27th Avenue. Oh, if I remember, yeah, that's a 40-foot wide right-of-way, but the curb-to-curb width is smaller because they weaved the planter strip and the curb and the sidewalks. So I think it's probably 26 feet curb to curb is what comes to mind, because as a traffic calming device, so they use that smaller street cross section to allow parking on both sides, and drivers needed to go slow and be careful.
Yeah.
They can with the proper
You
training.
can, but it's a weave in and out. Yeah.
Yes.
But as a pedestrian, that street is great.
Yeah, it
Yes.
is. True.
Yes.
Yeah, for the investment there, I don't think we'd be getting what we would want in the way of a real desirable area to live in.
Right.
So I would still stick with it's imperative to get water there, and the rest of this would be nice, but paying for it and what you get in the end, I don't know whether it's worth the investment.
And was your recommendation on the, was that what Joe was saying, linear foot and square foot at 150?
Well, I was agreeing with what Dave had proposed there. I think that's the way to go. If there's
Okay.
one
I
owner.
I just didn't know if you had a different, you just said linear foot, so I just didn't know if you had a different angle on it. But
Yeah,
basically, it would be the linear square 150. Is that what everybody's thinking?
Now, that would encompass, I think, you may have a couple of properties that would be more than that. All of them, I think, are going to be less.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's only two properties that would be large. Wait a moment. Yes, in the water district, there's only two properties that would be overly large that the 150-foot depth would not cover the entire property extent. That's the one on the north side of Yucca and the west side of 18th. All the others are within that parameter. There's a couple in the street proposal that are wider, so there's actually 4. Yeah. 3 of them. So that, but in the water, which is the primary issue here, there's only 2. They're
But
big.
By averaging out, it would well encompass those.
Yes, it does substantially reduce theirs. It'll be expensive for them. No illusion. It will be expensive for them. But they're also large enough that they do have the option, should they wish to consider, of partitioning their land, providing another lot, paying back their loan payments as needed with that option. I mean, that's entirely up to them, of course, it's their land. But that's a long-term thing on their side of the equation.
Okay, so I guess there's a consensus on linear foot, square foot, 150, at least to take as a recommendation, big R on it. And then the recommendation then would be to do the water. Okay. If council can figure out how to do the others without it being this high and.
Yeah, that's what, in my notes, that's what I put, that number 2 on the list would be water
Some sort of
with
upgrade,
as much
but
street
not-
improvement as we can, make possible.
Right, okay.
Because there is a need for the improvements. There's no getting around it. From what I saw, emergency vehicles would
Yeah.
really have a hard time making haste, to get in and out.
It wouldn't go very fast.
No, I bottomed out and I was trying to go slow. So,
Yeah, I've been
uh,
there.
but
Joe, what other, if we can today, while we got everybody here, what other recommendations do you need? We've got the lineal square 150, we've got the water that we're going to say is primary. What other ones do you want to answer?
If,
So you can make your decisions.
Right. 2 things primarily. Well, I guess you're right. In the ordinance, there's already an accommodation for low-income senior
There is.
type
I
of.
mean, the
Yeah.
elderly thing is already in there.
Right.
If they want to do something else, they probably certainly can, but that section is in there.
Yeah, right. I had forgotten that. The other thing is a confirmation or otherwise, if the city is going to contribute some percentage or dollar value, both to either the transmission main piece that's going to come through there, or in the general help to the community, a dollar value or percentage
Well, yeah, I guess my.
as
point
a
would be on- Yeah, my
contribution
point would
cost.
be on that, just to make it simple, would be, we would just do a cost estimate on what it would cost without the city doing anything. And then basically,
Oh,
if
yes.
the city comes in with 1%, 5%, a dollar amount, you just subtract it from the thing.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, that's what it says in the ordinance.
right.
So,
No.
look, these people have said, I don't know if they want to get involved in what the city's going to do or not going to do
Okay,
on that level.
okay.
And I don't think you need it for your calculation if you just use the number up here. What's it going to cost? And then everything else is deducted from it, and that's council's decision. Is that
Yeah.
okay, or?
yeah, the things like
Okay.
corner properties and how long your bond is going to run for. Those are council decisions, and,
Okay.
and I don't think that we need to be involved in making that determination.
Is that okay with the other two members?
Yes.
Kim, is that okay?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I think one concern, just as a staff member, that I have about that is that upsizing of the transmission main. You know, we are at least imposing somewhat of a increase in cost to the neighborhood by insisting that that line be 12 inches, whereas otherwise it would be what? 8? So, I mean, so there is some cost that the city is asking for, and it seems to me that as a minimum, we should say that, well, the city
Yes.
should foot the bill for that increase.
Yeah, I think
I
that's
agree.
correct. I don't think this
Okay.
should be treated as a new development. And all those charges apply that would apply to new developments. This is existing area. And if we want 12-inch lines because we're going to loop it later on, then we should pay that difference
The
between
one,
the 8s and the 12s.
the one problem with and I agree with you, I agree it shouldn't be treated as a new development. The one problem we have is that when it comes to our SDCs and the ordinances that we have, those are based on when a home is connected to the system.
Right.
And so none of these homes that would be getting water have been connected to the water system
Right.
before. And so under the ordinances that we have, they would be liable for those SDCs. I think I agree with you that my opinion is I don't want them to be assessed because I don't think that's quite fair in this. But the point is we need to make sure that we have good precedent, and we need to make sure that we're legally
Right.
protected to be able to carve out some sort of exception. And I'm not sure how the process for that.
I'm not either.
It's something we'd probably need to explore to make sure that we're on good ground legally to be allowed to do that.
Just looking at the other points that you had here, Joel, on number 6, a consideration for seniors, low income or disabled. I really don't think we should get into that. If you do, you're probably going to find that 50% of the people within the district are going to fit these requirements, at least one of them. And then you're going to be recalculating all over again on how to spread the costs out among the others. That's something that's nice if you could do it, if you just have a fund of money to where we can say to accommodate, we're going to give $5,000 per property toward the cost, but we're not in a position to do that as a city, as far as I know, unless Ray has a stash someplace.
The county does own some adjacent land, though.
Yeah.
Maybe lean on them.
Yeah, and council may have some other thoughts on that, but I don't really know that we need to make that decision
No.
as far as this committee is concerned. It's just kind of my thoughts on it.
And there is like I said, in the ordinance itself, in the back part, there is a section on senior deferral of payments if you're within an economic area,
Yeah,
lower economic area.
and it's possible, I'm not sure that it's out there, but it's possible that there may be some grant money someplace for disadvantaged neighborhoods that could apply toward this type of a project. Might be worth a quick look if in our computer age we can find out that information pretty quickly, because I think it would qualify as a disadvantaged neighborhood.
I think in the past, there's been CDBG stuff with that kind of situation, the community development block grants. Problem is right now, every CDBG application is
Yeah.
wrapped up in COVID.
Yeah.
But I mean, we certainly can take a look at that, see what we can find.
All right.
So if we shouldn't Business Oregon's Clean Water Program or DEQs, if that's, if they would have something maybe.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I'll check around. One other thing that I'll make you aware of that I just asked Joe about is that we'll need to do some research on is there are some properties that have development agreements in place. Essentially, Joe, you might be better able to explain exactly what those are and what they might be on the hook for.
Okay. The development agreements we have been of the more recent new construction homes there. They are for street improvements at the time of a future LID or city-initiated project that property owner is required to participate in the cost share for those properties, or for that cost.
Yeah.
There were a number of properties some time back, but they had non-remonstrances. So it's only the more recent 15-year, maybe 20-year at most, new home constructions that have the development agreements. As you know, the remonstrances went away back in the late
Right,
90s. But the others are still there and good.
Well, they are and they aren't. Council passed a long time ago that they don't believe in non-remonstrances, so those are out.
Right.
Point being is everybody's got a right to come in, and if they don't want it, they get a vote on it, and the 2/3 is the 2/3, and the 1/3 is the 1/3, and the majority is the majority. It doesn't matter what you've got written down there. Basically, those things are notices to those people that something down the line could happen to them. And the LID is what's happening. I mean, that's what it's geared for. It's not geared for something like you're going to go in and say you're going to do this. It's geared more for we're putting you on notice when you bought this place, that these things could happen. And so basically, if you come in here and say, I didn't know, no, this is here. It was written down that this had happened. But what was going to happen is basically an LID. And that's what you've got here. So it doesn't change anything that we're dealing with here. It doesn't make it any more or any less. It just happens to be there. More I see as a notice to them that, this is coming, but this is how it's coming, is an LID. Because like you say, whoever's for it is for it, but whoever's against it sort of gets pulled along and gets their property assessed. That's how an LID works.
I guess the thought I had behind that is that if we have existing development agreements with some properties and they cluster, or there are enough of them in an area and they're combined with the major landowner that wants improvements, if we wanted to move forward with street improvements in that kind of situation where you already have people who are on notice, and you have maybe you could do a smaller area for those street improvements or something like that. I feel better about asking those folks to pony up because they should have been on notice. They should have known. But it's probably something we should have looked at before to make sure, to see whether that gives us any help or not.
I'm just saying, I think they're more of a notice than anything. We can look back at it because we looked at them a couple of years ago.
I just think politically it's an easier.
Well, I don't think it'll handle what you're saying, but we can talk about it. Anyway, how do you want Joe, from what I've heard here, how do you want Joe to do the corner lots, or is that just up to, is that getting down too much in the weeds?
I think from my perspective, it is that you have more experience in coming up with something that would work and be equitable than we would, or I would anyway, in making a recommendation.
Well, then by Thursday, you should decide on something, whatever it is, and we'll explain it back to them, and they'll
There
say,
you go.
sounds fine, and, or not, or whatever they decide.
Right.
Yeah, okay. And then basically the idea is we got to put it in the report by Friday and get it over to Ray's office as a recorder and ship it off to the newspaper.
Yep.
What you're thinking.
Then you'll need us or want us back here at
I want
10
you back
o'clock
here on Thursday at 10.
Okay,
Thursday at 10 to go over what we've put down on paper and then go from there.
Okay,
okay.
These are the recommendations that you're making and
good.
and go from there. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for all taking your time and working through this process, and we'll see how it comes
Maybe
out
we
when
didn't
everybody
muddy the
looks at
waters too
numbers.
much for you.
Yeah, everybody looks at the numbers.
Tim, good to see you.